good one that we have for you today. It's a question that we frequently get from just from callers or from courtroom observers, interlopers, whomever, and it is whether the attorneys that are on the courtroom floor that are arguing on either side of the aisle, whether they genuinely despise or hate one another. Okay, and so I want to get that addressed for you today. It should be a fun conversation. But before we go there, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Need to introduce myself, especially if you're joining us for the first time. My name is Genghis Shakhan. I am the managing attorney here at Shakhan and Wilkerson Law Firm. I'm here alongside my partner, attorney Chelsea Wilkerson. Okay, we are two attorney tandem, and we had a boutique law firm that is small on purpose, is what we say, and that is so that we can really get to know our clients, get to know our cases, and then advocate for them in the best fashion possible. That's oftentimes very difficult. Both Chelsea and I have worked for larger law firms, and it's difficult when in a big firm where clients are frequently just a number. So we wanted to create something that was a little more personal, and something where we felt like we can advocate a lot better for our clientele. Okay, so that is a little bit about Shakhan and Wilkerson Law Firm. We cover three different areas of law that include personal injury, family law, which is going to include divorce, child custody, legitimation, as well as criminal defense. If we can help you in any of those areas, of course, if you're looking to retain an attorney, you can always give us a call at 478-845-1213, 404-999-9529, or you can just tap the link in our bio and chat with one of our experts. And we'll get on the horn with you. We'll email you, reach out to you. And if you're looking to retain counsel, and if we are a good fit for you, we'll be more than happy to represent your interest. Okay. All right. That being said, a quick disclaimer. This video is for educational purposes only. Is not intended to be a legal consultation. Of course, if you are looking to have a legal consultation, you will need to set up an appointment with us or with any law firm. And of course, by sitting through this video, this does not create an attorney-client relationship between yourself and the law firm of Shakhan and Wilkerson, or between you and myself. Okay. That being said, why don't we go ahead and just go and do our deep dive into today's discussion? And in his discussion, the topic was, do lawyers hate one another? Okay, do they really despise one another? And sometimes you can get the wrong impression. And when I mean the lawyers, I mean opposing counsel. Okay, so if you're if you're viewing, for example, a civil trial, you may see two opposing attorneys, and you might see either a jury. Or it could be a bench trial. You'll see the judge. Of course, it could be a judge as well as a jury, or it can just be a bench trial and just have a judge. And you'll see two opposing attorneys, and sometimes you'll see other attorneys seated at the table. And again, depending on your matter, let's say you're in juvenile court, there can be multiple attorneys really on the floor. You might have a guardian ad litem that's present. You can have an attorney for the child. You can have an attorney for the parents involved. You can have, a district attorney, or you can have a SAG, which is going to be the special assistant to the attorney general. You can have the judge. So it can be attorneys all over. It could be more attorneys in the courtroom than anyone else in the juvenile justice system. Or if you're talking about something like dependency court, or if you look at, for example, criminal cases, again, you might have the district attorney, assistant district attorneys, multiple assistant district attorneys sitting at the table, along with a private attorney or multiple private attorneys. If it's something like a RICO case, and there's a lot of co-defendants, there can be a lot of attorneys on the case. We saw that in the YSL trial in Atlanta, right? And so attorneys are usually all over your courthouse, and they can be a lot of them in a court at any given time. Usually you will see them, depending on the jurisdiction, they're sometimes seated together, especially if it's a motions calendar or a trial calendar. Sometimes they might be depending on the jurisdiction, and I do travel around to several jurisdictions. Sometimes they'll be seated in the front benches. Sometimes they might be in the jury box seated. And sometimes they just might be spread to the four winds, depending on how much room there is in the actual courthouse. They're usually pretty easy to spot. They're usually in suit and ties, or dressed pretty formally. And they might have a briefcase with them or some type of attaché. And they are usually they're pretty pompous, and they look pretty full of themselves. I will say that about my colleagues as well as myself, right? And of course, you want to look your best because you're representing your clients, right? And so you're representing their interests, and so it's important, to look the part, right? That's very important. No one is going to go to see a neurosurgeon that is, preparing for surgery in jeans and a wife beater. Okay, that's you will be taken aback by that, right? And so same thing with your attorney. If their attorney is sagging, and they have on a distressed jeans and a hoodie, that might be problematic for you, all right? Especially given whatever the price point is. You might not care about the work product, given you might care a lot about what their appearance is, okay? And so appearances are really important. And so when you walk into these courtrooms, you will see expensive suits, expensive shoes, expensive handbags, and they hopefully with all of that, there is substance. And usually I will say, given the bar and a lot of my colleagues, there is substance along with the flash. Okay. All right. That being said, we've gotten the disclaimer out of the way. And so let's talk about whether or not these opposing attorneys actually hate one another, right? And so if you've been to any courtroom, or you've watched television, and I continue to bring up Perry Mason and Matt Locke, and I always age myself bringing those television shows up, but that's what I kind of grew up watching. And you would see these opposing attorneys, and sometimes or if you walk into any courtroom in America, whether it's a superior court, magistrate court, you may not see as much in magistrate court, but maybe a superior court, or going to state court. You're seeing in a solicitor, you might see some private attorneys. You'll see a lot more of them in places like a superior court, federal court. And sometimes, you have these attorneys sitting on two different sides of the aisle, and it appears that they, dislike one another. And so, we're going to kind of talk about what is going on in the courtroom, whether or not they're, really engaged in the verbal fisticuffs, and at the, conclusion of those hearings, whether they're jumping onto social media and bad mouthing the opposing attorney, opposing counsel, or if it's just professional, right? And so some people might call it theatrics, okay? And we'll address that here shortly, okay? So the reality is often very different than what you see in an actual courtroom or on television, okay? So what we're going to do here is we're going to peel the curtain back so that you can get a bird's eye view into what's actually happening in that courtroom, okay? And so your attorney's job is to advocate, all right? And so it's not to be friends. I mean, let's just be clear. You're paying for them to advocate for you on your behalf. And so sometimes, that advocacy, it comes off as aggressive, okay? And maybe rightly so. And so every attorney has an ethical duty to zealously advocate. And that's a word that you'll hear a lot among attorneys in that community. It's part of the lexicon about being zealous in your advocacy, okay, to represent your client within the bounds and confines of the law. And so sometimes that means making difficult arguments, objecting to evidence, or vigorously kind of cross-examining witnesses, okay? And so what might come across as very aggressive, especially when you are hearing objections, attorneys make objections to maybe other arguments or other questions that are being posed by the opposing counsel. It might come across as rude, flippant. However, again, the job of the attorney is to advocate and to be a zealous advocate. And so, that is going to be necessary to advance the legal interest of your client. Okay, and so it's not that the attorneys are rude, but it's required in being a strong advocate, and so you don't want to confuse it with the opposing attorney disliking the other attorney and wanting to interrupt them as they're giving their spiel before the court or before a jury. Okay, and so sometimes these courtroom battles that you see, they are in fact just battles, professional battles, as opposed to being, personal. Okay, and so many attorneys who appear to be fighting in court, they're not doing that. You'll see them sometimes shake hands before a hearing, shake hands after a hearing, talk professionally to one another during breaks. Sometimes they may have lunch with one another. May belong to the same professional organizations. Oftentimes, especially with attorneys, we refer cases to other opposing attorneys who we respect their abilities. Okay. And so we do that at Shakhan and Wilkerson Law. We get cases that are referred to us as well, because, folks know that we show up for our clients. They know that we do our homework. They know that we advocate. And there are parties out there that we know the same. Okay. Some clients we can't help or we can't assist because it's just something that falls outside of our area of expertise. And so if I know of another attorney, maybe it's local and maybe it's not local, I will refer, and I know that I know essentially the work product of that attorney. Maybe we've been up against that attorney before. Maybe, they have, done an excellent job presenting their case. It's nothing for us to refer potential clients to that law firm or to that attorney. Okay, and so that happens frequently where folks will call in and ask for referrals, and you will get that from other attorneys when again there is a respect, a reverence for what the other side, you've seen that other side do in a courtroom. And so it's not just about wins and losses. Sometimes you're going to win cases, right? So, if there are, we represent clients who've been accused of murder, who are involved in RICO acts, or RICO, they have RICO charges, who are going through divorces. You're not going to win all of those cases, all right? That's not reality. But it has nothing to do with your advocacy, right? It has nothing to do with how you show up in court. It has nothing to do with your professionalism or your professional name. And so, again, we don't necessarily look at wins or losses. And then I would really caution folks on, using those type of metrics because in a murder case, in the murder trial, right? Obviously, what is a win or what is a loss? Okay. It's going to depend a lot of times, on the evidence, right? It's going to, depend on how strong a case is, how much, how strong it is in terms of, what the state may have in terms of evidence and testimony, et cetera. Okay. And so what that might look like is whether it's going to be not so much is going to be a guilty plea or, maybe that person is going to be convicted. You might be mitigating, right? And so you might, instead of, something like malice murder, it may come back as, involuntary manslaughter or something like that, right? And so, wins and losses, and I'm only saying this to essentially say that wins and losses, there are some unique metrics on how that's going to be calculated and determined. And usually that's something that's local to the attorney and that client, all right? And it's not something that, you can kind of really tally up as someone that is, just, an observer, a casual observer. And I'm saying that because that would have nothing to do with a referral that might, one attorney might make to another, understanding how that attorney advocates, how they show up for their clients in court, in the courtroom. Okay, so that happens. Referrals happen often, all right? And so this is one of the reasons I talked about things looking personal. This is one of the reasons why it may appear personal is because of those heated objections or because of the raised voices and sometimes just disagreements. It's not unusual for the attorneys to disagree. That's the reason why we're in an adversarial system. All right, the judge is up there as a referee, essentially. Okay, or the jury. All right. And so, the jury's not the referee, but, the fact finders. However, the attorneys, their jobs are to advocate, right? And so there are going to be disagreements that, are going to have to be settled. And a lot of times it's going to require, both sides really presenting their best argument as to why, their guy is innocent in a criminal context or why their guy or gal, should get spousal support in a situation where there's disparities in income, and so that's going to require advocacy, tough advocacy, aggressive advocacy. And so you might also see that on a cross-examination, right? Really aggressive cross-examination from one or both sides. And then you'll also see that with settlement negotiations. There might be tough settlement negotiations. Again, does not mean that the attorneys don't dislike one another, is that both attorneys have a job, and that job is to advocate. I also will add this, okay? If you watch, and I'm going to use a different analogy or metaphor, if you think about sports, okay, when the Lakers are playing the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? When Kobe was alive, did Kobe hate LeBron James? Now, they might have gone head to head on the basketball court, right? And it may look like those guys, they are pushing and shoving in the paint, backing one another down. They're jawing at one another, pointing their fingers in each other's faces. But at the end of the game, they'll shake hands, give each other hugs, pat on the backs, and be the best of buddies. So you can be professional and you can be very aggressive, but it does not mean that you dislike one another. You'll see that on the football field, right? Two teams, they line up against one another, smack one another around, and then at the conclusion of the game, they're taking photos together. They're shaking hands. They're signing each other's jerseys. Now, you'll see the Atlanta Falcons and, the New Orleans Saints on the same field. Do they hate each other? The cities might, right? And maybe some of the players might as well, right? If you know anything about that rivalry. Let's talk about another rivalry. I'm from Ohio. And I graduated from the Ohio State University. Do Ohio State fans hate the University of Michigan fans? Of course we do. Okay. So that I'm just saying that might be a unique situation, but generally speaking, it's not unusual for professional teams to play very aggressively, very hard against one another, and then afterward, just come together, shake hands, and kind of hang out and talk about the game, and maybe they went to undergrad together, and maybe they hang out in the summer. Same deal. Attorneys will come together, talk about their kids or other professional associations, or maybe even trips or vacations, whatever attorneys talk about, right? And we talk about cool things, all right, if you know anything about law life, okay? However, that all being said, during court, it might come off as the parties don't care for each other, but that usually is not the case. Unless sometimes you will have attorneys that have axes to grind against other attorneys, personal rivalries, and that's the same as in sports. Some folks just don't care for one another. I'm trying to think of anyone that comes to mind, and maybe like the boxing arena, basketball or football. But there are, and when I think about places like, for example, Ohio State, Michigan, that is a very intense rivalry. Many times the players get into fights, before the game and even after the contest, because there just is that animus, that animosity that exists. And sometimes, that is what can happen in the courtroom as well. two attorneys just, they kind of have it in for one another, okay, and they just happen to land on the opposing side of the aisle, okay. And so it can happen. It generally does not happen, okay. So professionalism matters in these situations. So good lawyers really, really understand that. So today, the person that might be your opposing counsel, tomorrow can be your co-counsel, okay. And so that's happened with us as well. We have been opposing counsel against folks who have given us great referrals, or I've been personally co-counsel with folks who you might have been up against just a few months ago. And so it can happen over your professional career. Again, none of this stuff is personal, right? So you can go up against, and this happens, especially if you practice in one jurisdiction for years, the same people over and over and over and over again, all right? So sometimes, for example, Superior Court, you're up against the same assistant district attorneys, right? Or if you're in civil court, you're up against the same local attorneys in divorce or child custody. So, you have an understanding for another attorney's style, as well as their work product, okay, as well as their level of professionalism, as well as their level of cooperation. If you're talking about possibly settling a case, whether or not that's something that's doable with this particular attorney, right? Kind of given your history, right? And so maintaining professionalism is really, really important. It benefits everyone, especially the client. To be honest with you, sometimes those relationships are going to be super helpful, especially when you look at someone like working with the district attorney, or you're working with the solicitor. Being able to reach out, you can ask questions about a plea offer, or set, kind of, you can talk amicably about what a settlement might look like. And so that's going to advance your client's interests. And so it's great to have those types of relationships where you can reach out and really begin to initiate a conversation that's going to be helpful for your client. Okay. So now, when attorneys generally disagree, this is again in the professional context, there are usually legitimate reasons for it, and they may strongly disagree about interpretations of the law, admissibility of evidence, witness credibility, the settlement value, again in a civil context, or if someone's trying to calculate damages, constitutional issues, as well as trial strategies. So attorneys disagree the same way in a classroom. Administrators might disagree about pedagogy. Okay, and so it's not unusual wherever there are problems and humans are involved. For people, as my mother would say, there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat, right? And so there are many ways to approach a problem, and people are just going to disagree about how that can be done. So that's not, when it comes to legal issues, that is not unusual. So attorneys can be friends outside of the courtroom. Some of my best buds are other attorneys, right? Some of us, we're not in the same practice areas, and some of us are, right? And we'll talk about all kinds of things. And so you can have, there are other human beings like yourself. They have other interests like yourself, right? And so, I like to travel. There are other attorneys that travel, whether they're, travel abroad or whether it's local. You might have, those interests. You might be part of a bike club. You might attend the same gym. You might be, a coffee enthusiast, and, y'all might debate on who the best baristas are in town. Your kids may attend, the same child care center. So, that is not unusual. You might attend professional development sessions and programs together, right? And so, if you know anything about the legal community, there are conferences all over the country all of the time. And so you may see other attorneys at these conferences. You may present on a panel. That's happened with me, on a panel with other attorneys that okay? And so over the years, and as you continue to practice, as with anything, you're going to develop friendships, you're going to develop relationships, and so that is not unusual, okay? And these relationships, again, can be leveraged to help your client, over the years, really depending on what courtroom you may land in, because as you know, you've been sitting with us, and hopefully you have, and you follow us. There are a number of types of courts. Of course, with when it comes to law, it really touches all areas of really human activity. So whether you're in business, the medical profession, whether you are, have a civil issue, maybe you in a domestic relations issue, you got a traffic ticket, you've been accused of a crime, you're trying to, again, start a new business, you're going through an eviction, you're going through a bankruptcy, you're going to come in contact with the legal system and legal professionals and experts. Okay. Now, so let's talk a little bit about the disrespect that sometimes people anticipate or expect to see from these opposing attorneys in court. And it does not hurt your case for your counsel to be respectful. In fact, I would say it helps the case and helps the client. And so some clients feel some type of way if their counsel is cordial with the opposing attorney, or say that they aren't fighting hard enough. Okay, and again, the you don't have to have anger or aggression or any kind of animus between you and the opposing attorney. That's unnecessary to advance a client's interest. Really it comes down to the advocacy. That's what we are looking for, not necessarily, whether or not, I hate the attorney on the opposing side of the aisle. In reality, professionalism is going to, advance, your client's interest much further, because again, professionalism and advocacy can absolutely coexist, and it helps, with negotiations, treating one another and treating everyone in that courtroom, whether it's the bailiff, the judge, or the court reporter, with respect. Okay. And maintaining credibility is really important with the judges and the opposing counsel, because again, you work with these people, and so you want to make sure that you always have a working relationship, so that because you're going to be seeing that those parties over and over again throughout the years, and it's going to be important for each client that you come before that judge with, right? So this is not a one-off. You're not walking into court with one client's case and you're never going to see these people again. Okay, and so having a working relationship helps all of your clients. All right, and helps with advocacy. Personal, of course, personal conflict, it can become a problem in some situations. One of the reasons why attorneys are hired is they should be the kind of really a disinterested party. You do your clearest thinking when that thinking is really encapsulated in logos, right, and logic. All right, and so the more emotional you become, really the more like the client you become, right? It become very difficult to think about legal stratagems, case law, and it really removes the logic and reason from how you need to be advancing your client's interest. And I say that because anger, of course, clouds judgment. So the angrier your counsel is at the opposing attorney or at the judge, it really begins to impact their reasoning. All right, and so you want to focus on evidence, law, and the client's best interest, as opposed to arguing with the opposing side. Arguing with the opposing side, again, that is the attorney's agenda, and that has nothing to do with my client. And so that is not what I've been paid to do. I haven't been paid to really think about my agenda. I've been paid to advance my client's interest. And so that's why it's important to minimize that, really that insertion of yourself and ego and when it comes to working these cases. Okay, so professionalism is very important. Being disinterested is very important. so that you can advance your client's interest. Okay. And so from a client, you should expect this from your attorney, to be prepared to advocate for you in your interests, really to conduct yourself professionally. That's the other part. You don't want to be out of control. When folks are angry, they're out of control. Sometimes it's a little challenging to remain professional. You want to litigate aggressively when necessary, and I say when necessary, negotiate when appropriate, and then again, you want to treat everyone with respect. You want to be respectful, because again, a courtroom is just one of those places where logic, reason, that should be really what everyone is engaged in order to make sure that things are just and fair. All right. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. It's a little peek behind the curtain about what happens in a courtroom when it comes to really, litigating against opposing attorneys. Again, just think really, if you are a client, you want your attorney to be professional. You want them to be amicable. At the same time, you do want, them to be personable. And you just want to make sure that they are focused on you and focused on your legal interest only. Okay. All right, guys. Thank you for joining us. Again, if you need counsel, you're looking to retain an attorney, you can always hit the link in our bio and speak with one of our legal experts, or you can give us a call at 478-845-1213 or 404-999-9529. As always, it's been a pleasure. If this video has been helpful or entertaining, please think about liking it, or you're welcome to share it, but make sure that you follow us and make sure that you hit that notification bell, guys. All right.